Who are you and why are you crying at my cousin's grave? Grant Whitmore's voice sliced through the autumn chill at Oak Ridge Cemetery, his blue eyes narrowing at the young black woman before him. Sable Knight, 23, clutched a one-year-old boy, Noel, whose striking resemblance to the late James Whitmore sent Grant's world spinning. The golden leaves swirled around James's tombstone, marking a moment that would unravel secrets and change lives. What was Sable hiding about Noel's past? And why did her defiant gaze hint at a deeper truth? Welcome to a gripping tale of love, betrayal, and justice. Don't miss a single twist. Subscribe to our channel for the latest videos and share in the comments where you're watching from. Will Sable's promise withstand a billionaire's power? Stick around to uncover the shocking revelations that await. The autumn wind howled through Oak Ridge Cemetery, carrying a bitter chill that seeped into the bones. Golden leaves spiraled across the gray tombstones, their rustling the only sound breaking the somber silence. Grant Whitmore, a 33-year-old billionaire with hair the color of burnished gold, stood before the marble headstone of his cousin's son, James Whitmore. The young man, only 25 when he perished in a warehouse fire 3 years ago, had been the bright hope of the Whitmore family, a culinary prodigy destined to carry the legacy of Whitmore Culinary Group. Grant's polished black shoes sank slightly into the damp earth as he clutched a bouquet of white roses, their petals trembling in the breeze. His piercing blue eyes, usually sharp with the confidence of a man who commanded boardrooms, were clouded with a grief that time had not dulled. He knelt, placing the roses at the base of the stone, his fingers brushing the engraved name, James Alexander Whitmore, 1995-2020. I should have been there, Grant whispered, his voice barely audible, heavy with the weight of unspoken regrets. James had been like a younger brother, his laughter a rare warmth in Grant's world of contracts and mergers. The fire that took him had been ruled an accident, but the questions it left behind gnawed at Grant's soul. A soft sob broke his reverie. Grant's head snapped up, his instincts honed by years of navigating corporate sharks. Across the grave, half hidden by the shadow of a gnarled oak, stood a young black woman, no older than 23, her faded denim jacket clinging to her slender frame. In her arms, she cradled a boy, barely a year old, his pale skin and shock of blonde hair stark against her dark skin. The child's bright blue eyes locked onto Grant, and a jolt of recognition hit him like a fist to the chest. Those eyes, they were James's eyes, mirrored in a face so eerily familiar, it stole his breath. Who are you, and why are you crying at my cousin's grave? Grant's voice cut through the air, sharp but laced with a tremor he couldn't suppress. He rose to his feet, his 6-foot frame towering over the woman, though her posture, defiant despite her tears, made her seem unyielding. The woman lifted her chin, her dark eyes glistening but fierce, like polished obsidian catching the light. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, careful not to jostle the child. I'm Sable Knight, she said, her voice steady despite the quiver in it. And this is Noel, James's son. The words landed like a thunderclap. Grant's knees buckled, and he gripped the edge of the headstone to steady himself. James's son, he repeated, his mind racing. That's impossible. I would have known. The Whitmore family was tight-knit, their secrets guarded like treasures. James had never mentioned a child, a lover, or anyone like this woman standing before him. Yet Noel's features, the sharp cheekbones, the curve of his tiny mouth, were unmistakably Whitmore, a living echo of the cousin Grant had lost. Sable's gaze didn't waver. I promised James I'd protect Noel, no matter what, she said, her words carrying a weight that hinted at burdens unspoken. She adjusted Noel in her arms, the boy nuzzling into her shoulder, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. We come here every month. I didn't expect anyone else today. Grant's eyes narrowed, his business instincts kicking in. Protect him from what? He asked, stepping closer, his voice low and probing. And how do I know you're telling the truth? You could be anyone, a con artist looking for a payout. The accusation hung in the air, harsh and deliberate, but Sable didn't flinch. Her lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. If I wanted money, Mr. Whitmore, I wouldn't be standing in a graveyard with holes in my shoes. She gestured to her worn sneakers, the soles peeling at the edges. I'm here because James mattered to us, because Noel deserves to know his father, even if it's just through stories at his grave. Grant's jaw tightened. Her sincerity was disarming, but the stakes were too high for blind trust. You say he's James's son, but where's the proof? A birth certificate? A DNA test? His tone was cold, but his heart pounded with a mix of hope and dread. A child, James's child, could mean a piece of his cousin lived on, but it also meant secrets kept from the family, secrets that could unravel everything. Sable's expression hardened, her arms tightening around Noel. I don't owe you proof, she said, her voice low but fierce. I owe James my word. Noel is his, and I'm all he has now. She turned her gaze to the headstone, her eyes softening as she traced the carved letters with a glance. You didn't know James as well as you think, Mr. Whitmore. He had a life you never saw. The words stung, a blade slipping between Grant's ribs. He wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the conviction in Sable's voice held him back. She wasn't just grieving, she was guarding something, or someone, with a ferocity that made him pause. Noel stirred, letting out a soft whimper, and Sable rocked him gently, humming a lullaby under her breath. The tenderness of the act clashed with the steel in her demeanor, painting a picture of a woman forged by hardship yet unbroken. Grant ran a hand through his hair, his mind a storm of questions. If what you're saying is true, he said, choosing his words carefully, then Noel is a Whitmore, my family. Why didn't you come to us? Why hide him? His voice softened, betraying the ache beneath his skepticism. Sable met his gaze, her eyes searching his as if weighing his worth. Because some promises are worth more than money or names, she said, and because I don't trust people who think they can buy everything. She stepped back, her movement deliberate, creating distance between them. We're done here, Mr. Whitmore. Don't follow us. She turned, her footsteps crunching on the gravel path as she walked away, Noel's blonde head bobbing against her shoulder. Grant stood frozen, the bouquet of roses at his feet now scattered by the wind. His world, so carefully ordered, had cracked open in the span of minutes. A child, James's child, raised in secrecy by a woman who looked at him with equal parts defiance and pain. Who was Sable Knight, really? And what did she know about James's life that the Whitmores didn't? As her figure disappeared into the mist, Grant's hand clenched into a fist. He would find answers, no matter the cost. But deep down, a flicker of fear stirred. What if those answers led to truths he wasn't ready to face? The cemetery fell silent again, the wind carrying away the echoes of a promise that would soon shake the foundations of his empire. The city's pulse thrummed beyond the cracked window of Sable Knight's one-bedroom apartment, a relentless hum of traffic and distant sirens. The walls, stained yellow by time and neglect, seemed to close in as Sable rocked Noel in her arms, his soft breaths a fragile anchor in the storm of her thoughts. At 23, she carried the weight of a promise heavier than the world, a vow to James Whitmore to protect his son, Noel, from dangers she could barely name. The memory of Grant Whitmore's piercing blue eyes at the cemetery haunted her, his accusation of deceit ringing in her ears. She glanced at Noel, his blonde curls damp with sleep, and whispered, I won't let you down. But the pantry, nearly bare save for a half-empty box of cereal, mocked her resolve. Sable's life was a tapestry of sacrifice. 3 years ago, she'd been a housemaid for a wealthy family, scrubbing floors to pay for night classes in business administration. When her employers went bankrupt, her job vanished, leaving her to scrape by on odd jobs, cleaning offices, babysitting, anything to keep Noel fed. The apartment, in a crumbling building on the city's south side, reeked of mildew, its single window offering a view of a graffiti-scarred alley. Rent devoured most of her income, and the rest went to Noel's formula, diapers, and secondhand clothes. Yet Sable's spirit burned fiercely, fueled by the memory of James's trust and the boy who called her Mama in his babbling voice. Across town, Grant Whitmore sat in his penthouse office, the skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. The encounter at the cemetery had left him restless, his mind churning with questions. James, his cousin's son, had a child, a Whitmore heir, raised in obscurity by a woman who defied him with a fire he couldn't ignore. He dialed Elena Voss, his private investigator, her voice crisp over the line. "I want everything on Sable Knight," Grant said, his tone clipped. "Her past, her present, her secrets. And find out if that boy is really James's." Elena promised results within 48 hours, and Grant leaned back, his fingers drumming on the mahogany desk. Sable's defiance intrigued him, but trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. 2 days later, Elena's report arrived, a stark dossier of Sable's life. Sable Knight, 23, orphaned at 10, raised by her Aunt Helen, a paralegal with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. No criminal record, no known connections to the Whitmores beyond her claim about Noel. She'd worked as a housemaid until 6 months ago, now surviving on piecemeal gigs. Her apartment was a single room in a crime-ridden neighborhood, her bank account hovering near zero. Most puzzling was Noel. No birth certificate, no hospital records, as if his mother had never existed. Grant's jaw tightened as he read, the absence of answers fueling his suspicion. But the report's final line chilled him. Sable had been seen visiting James's grave monthly for 3 years, always with Noel. Moved by an impulse he couldn't name, Grant drove to Sable's address, a grocery bag in hand, formula, diapers, and a loaf of bread. The building loomed like a relic of forgotten dreams, its stairwell reeking of stale beer. He knocked on Sable's door, his polished shoes absurdly out of place on the scuffed linoleum. The door creaked open, revealing Sable in a worn sweatshirt, her dark eyes narrowing. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice wary. "What do you want?" "I thought Noel might need these," Grant said, lifting the bag. Sable hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing him into the cramped space. The apartment was sparse, a sagging couch, a small table cluttered with bills, a crib wedged in the corner. Noel toddled toward Sable, clutching a stuffed bear, his blue eyes bright with curiosity. Grant's heart lurched. Those eyes were James's, unmistakably. "He's a happy kid," Grant said, his voice softer than intended. Sable scooped Noel up, her gaze guarded. "He's loved," she said. "Why are you really here? To accuse me again?" Grant set the bag on the table, his eyes catching a folder tucked beneath a stack of envelopes. It was partially open, revealing a photograph. James, smiling, his arm around a white woman with auburn hair, a newborn Noel cradled between them. Grant's breath caught. "Who's she?" he asked, pointing to the woman. Sable's face tightened, her fingers tightening around Noel. "That's Catherine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Noel's mother. She and James are gone now, and I'm all he has." The words carried a weight of finality, but her eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps, or a secret she wasn't ready to share. Grant pressed, his voice low. "Gone how? And why didn't James tell us about her? Or Noel?" Sable turned away, busying herself with unpacking the groceries. "Some things aren't meant for your world, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "James had his reasons." Her evasiveness stoked Grant's frustration, but her tenderness with Noel, kissing his forehead as she set him in the crib, stilled his tongue. This wasn't a con artist. This was a woman fighting to survive, bound by a promise he didn't yet understand. Grant's gaze lingered on the folder. "If Noel's a Whitmore," he said, choosing his words carefully, "he deserves more than this." He gestured to the peeling wallpaper, the flickering light bulb. Sable whirled, her eyes blazing. "He deserves love, not your money," she snapped. "You think you can walk in here with groceries and judge me? I've kept him safe, fed, and happy. Can you say the same for James when he needed you?" The accusation hit like a slap. Memories of James's distant smiles and unanswered calls flooding Grant's mind. He'd been too busy building an empire to notice his cousin's struggles. "I'm trying to help," he said, his voice rough. Sable softened, but only slightly. "Then leave us be," she said, "unless you're ready to listen, not just demand." Grant left, the folder's image burned into his mind. James, Catherine, Noel, a family he'd never known. In his car, he called Elena again. "Dig deeper," he said. "Find out who Catherine was and why there's no trace of her." As he drove into the night, Sable's words echoed. James had his reasons. What had James been hiding? And why had he entrusted his son to a woman like Sable, who lived on the edge of survival yet carried herself like a warrior? Back in her apartment, Sable locked the door, her heart pounding. She slid the folder from the table, her fingers tracing James's face in the photo. "I'm keeping my promise," she whispered, her voice fierce with resolve. The truth about Catherine and James's deaths was a fire she'd guarded for 3 years, and Grant's arrival threatened to ignite it. She wouldn't let him take Noel. Not yet. Not until she was ready to face the shadows that had stolen her friends. For now, she'd protect her son, even if it meant standing alone against a billionaire's power. The Whitmore Culinary Group headquarters loomed over the city like a glass monolith, its sleek lines reflecting the morning sun in a dazzling display of power. Inside, on the 50th floor, Grant Whitmore paced his corner office, the skyline sprawling beneath him like a conquered kingdom. At 33, he was a titan in the culinary world, his empire built on precision and ambition. But the encounter with Sable Knight in Noel at the cemetery had cracked his carefully constructed world. The photograph of James with Catherine and Noel haunted him, a family he'd never known, a secret his cousin had kept. Today, he would get answers. He'd invited Sable to his office, not out of kindness, but strategy. If Noel were a Whitmore, Grant would secure his future, no matter the cost. Sable stood outside the towering building, her thrift store dress, navy blue slightly frayed at the hem, a stark contrast to the polished executives streaming past. At 23, she was no stranger to intimidation, but the weight of Grant's invitation pressed against her chest. She adjusted her bag, heavy with the folder of secrets she guarded, and squared her shoulders. "For Noel," she whispered, stepping into the lobby. The marble floors gleamed, and the receptionist's cool glance sized her up as an outsider. Sable's chin lifted. She wasn't here to be judged. She was here to protect her son. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was silent, save for the hum of ascent. When the doors opened, Grant's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara, led Sable to his office. The space was a study in wealth. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, a wall of windows framing the city like a painting. Grant stood behind the desk, his golden hair catching the light, his blue eyes assessing her with a mix of curiosity and calculation. "Miss Knight," he said, gesturing to a chair positioned lower than his own, a subtle power play. "Sit." Sable remained standing, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. "I'd rather not," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "What do you want, Mr. Whitmore?" Her defiance was a spark in the sterile room, and Grant's lips twitched, a flicker of respect breaking through his guarded demeanor. He'd expected nervousness, perhaps desperation, but Sable carried herself like a warrior, her worn dress a badge of survival. Grant leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. "I want to talk about Noel," he said, his tone measured. "He's a Whitmore, my family. I saw the photo in your apartment. James, Catherine, and Noel. You can't deny he's my cousin's son." Sable's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, letting him continue. "You're struggling, Sable. I've seen where you live, how you barely make ends meet. Noel deserves more, a future, opportunities, the best this world can offer." He slid a check across the desk, the numbers stark against the crisp paper. $500,000. "This is for Noel," Grant said, his voice smooth but firm. "Take it. Move into my estate. He'll have private schools, travel, and a legacy. You can visit him on weekends and holidays. It's a fair deal." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his wealth, his certainty that money could solve anything. Sable stared at the check, her heart pounding. The sum was unimaginable, enough to erase her debts, to give Noel comforts she'd never dreamed of. But it was also a chain, a transaction that would tear her son from her arms. Her fingers twitched, but not toward the check. Instead, her eyes blazed, and she stepped closer, her voice low and fierce. "You think you can buy my son?" she said, each word a blade. "Noel's not a deal to be made. He's mine, not by blood, but by love. I promised James I'd keep him safe, and I won't break that vow for your money." Grant's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise breaking his composure. "Safe?" he echoed, leaning back. "Safe from what? You're a single woman, no job, living in a place that's falling apart. What can you give him? Scraps and promises? His tone sharpened, but beneath it lay a genuine question, a plea to understand why she'd reject a fortune. Sable's laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. I give him a mother, she said. I wake up at 3 a.m. when he cries. I sing him to sleep. I stretch every dollar to keep him fed. That's more than your check can buy. She reached for the check, and for a moment Grant thought she might take it. Instead, she tore it in half, the pieces fluttering to the floor like fallen leaves. Noel's not for sale, Mr. Whitmore, and neither am I. The air crackled with tension, the torn check a symbol of her defiance. Grant stood, his height imposing, but Sable didn't step back. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. A Whitmore belongs with his family. I can give him everything James would have wanted. A name, a legacy. Sable's eyes flashed, her voice cutting like a whip. James wanted Noel safe, loved, free from people like you who think wealth is everything. She paused, her gaze piercing. You didn't know James, not really. If you did, you'd know why he trusted me, not you. The words struck Grant like a blow, memories of James's quiet distance flooding back, missed dinners, unanswered texts, a life Grant had assumed he understood. He stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. Then tell me, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Who was Catherine? Why did James hide Noel? What are you protecting him from? His questions hung in the air, but Sable's expression shuddered, her lips pressing into a thin line. Some truths aren't yours to demand, she said, turning toward the door. If you care about Noel, stop trying to buy him and start listening. She paused, her hand on the doorknob, her voice dropping to a whisper. Because there's more to James's death than you know, and I'm not the one you should be questioning. Grant watched her go, the click of the door echoing in the silent office. The torn check lay scattered on the floor, a testament to his miscalculation. Sable Knight wasn't just a struggling maid. She was a fortress, guarding secrets that could unravel everything he thought he knew about James. His hand clenched into a fist, frustration warring with a grudging admiration. She'd walked into his world, faced his power, and left with her head high. He sank into his chair, the city's glitter mocking him through the windows. Sable's words echoed. There's more to James's death than you know. What had James been hiding? And why had he entrusted his son to a woman who lived on the edge of survival, yet burned with a fire that rivaled Grant's own? He picked up the phone, dialing Elena Voss. Find out everything about a woman named Catherine, he said, and don't stop digging into Sable Knight. I want the truth. As Sable stepped into the elevator, her heart raced, but her resolve held firm. Grant's offer had shaken her, but not enough to break her promise. She thought of the folder in her bag, photos, notes, fragments of a truth too dangerous to share. For now, she'd keep Grant at arm's length, protecting Noel from a world that had already taken too much. The city's neon glow bled into the night, casting jagged shadows across Grant Whitmore's penthouse office. The sleek lines of Whitmore Culinary Group's headquarters felt like a cage tonight, trapping him with questions that gnawed at his soul. 3 days had passed since Sable Knight tore his $500,000 check in half, her defiance a spark that both infuriated and intrigued him. The photograph from her apartment, James, Catherine, and baby Noel, burned in his memory, a puzzle with missing pieces. James, his cousin's son, had hidden a child, a lover, and perhaps a life Grant had never understood. Now Sable's cryptic warning echoed, there's more to James's death than you know. Grant's fingers tightened around a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid untouched. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Elena Voss, his private investigator, had delivered a preliminary report that morning, and its contents churned in his mind. The fire that killed James and Catherine 3 years ago, at a warehouse owned by Lake Enterprises, a subsidiary of Whitmore Culinary Group, had been ruled accidental, but Elena's sources whispered of arson. Traces of an accelerant, conveniently overlooked by the fire marshal, pointed to foul play. Lake Enterprises, run by Victor Lake, a ruthless executive with a knack for bending laws, had been James's focus in his final months. Grant had trusted Lake, his sharp mind and sharper ambition, a cornerstone of the company's growth. But Sable's words, her fierce protection of Noel, suggested a darkness Grant had been too busy to see. He dialed Elena, his voice clipped. "What else about Catherine?" he asked. Elena's reply was measured. "Catherine Harlow, 24 at the time of death, no family, worked as a sous chef at one of your restaurants, engaged to James, but no public record of their relationship. She's a ghost. No birth records for Noel, no trace of her after the fire." Grant's jaw tightened. "And Lake?" Elena hesitated. "He's clean on paper, but there's chatter. Bribes, labor violations, deals with unsavory types. James was digging into Lake Enterprises before he died. I'm still chasing leads." Grant hung up, his mind racing. If James had uncovered something, would it cost him his life? Driven by instinct, Grant drove to Sable's apartment, the city's underbelly unfolding in a blur of graffiti and flickering streetlights. The building's stairwell reeked of despair, but he climbed to her door, knocking sharply. Sable opened it, her dark eyes wary. Noel asleep in a crib behind her. She wore a faded sweatshirt, her hair pulled back, but her posture was unyielding. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice low to avoid waking Noel. "You don't give up, do you?" "I need the truth," Grant said, stepping inside without invitation. The cramped apartment felt smaller tonight, the air thick with unspoken tension. A cardboard box sat on the table, spilling papers, news clippings, handwritten notes, and a USB drive. Grant's eyes locked onto it, but Sable moved to block his view. "You can't just barge in here," she said, her tone sharp. "This is my home." Grant's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. "You said there's more to James's death. I'm starting to believe you. The fire, was it an accident?" Sable's breath hitched, her hands clenching. For a moment silence stretched, broken only by Noel's soft snores. Then, her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of her secrets had grown too heavy. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was murder." The word landed like a gunshot. Grant's heart pounded, but he kept his expression neutral, urging her to continue. Sable sank onto the couch, her eyes distant. "James and Catherine were investigating Lake Enterprises," she said. "They found evidence. Money laundering, worker exploitation, bribes to city officials. They were going to expose Victor Lake." She paused, her gaze flickering to the crib. "The fire was meant to silence them. Catherine was pregnant with Noel when they got engaged. She gave birth just before they died." Grant's mind reeled. "And Noel?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sable's eyes met his, raw with pain. "Catherine gave him to me the night of the fire. She and James came to my place, frantic. They knew Lake was on to them. Catherine begged me to take Noel, to keep him safe from Lake's reach. I was her best friend. She trusted me." Sable's voice cracked, but she pressed on. "They went to the warehouse to get more evidence. They never came back." Grant sank into a chair, the room spinning. James, murdered. Catherine, erased. And Lake, a man he'd dined with, promoted, trusted, at the heart of it. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Sable's laugh was bitter. "Lake owns people. Cops, judges, inspectors. I was a nobody, a maid with a baby and no proof. If I spoke up, Noel would have been next." Grant's eyes fell on the box of papers. "That's proof, isn't it?" he said, nodding toward it. Sable's hand instinctively moved to the box, protective. "It's all I have," she said. "Notes James left, emails Catherine hacked, recordings I pieced together, but it's not enough. Not yet." Her voice hardened. "Lake's too powerful. I've been waiting, learning, and planning. I won't let him touch Noel." Grant leaned forward, his voice urgent. "You don't have to do this alone. I have resources, lawyers, investigators. Let me help." Sable studied him, her eyes searching for a lie. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. "You work with Lake. You're part of his world." The accusation stung, but Grant met her gaze. "Because James was family," he said. "And if what you're saying is true, I've been blind too long. Noel deserves justice." Sable hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the box. "Justice," she murmured, as if tasting the word. "You don't know what you're asking. Lake's dangerous. He'll come for anyone who threatens him." Grant's jaw tightened. "Let him try," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'm not afraid of him." But Sable's eyes held a warning, a glimpse of the fear she'd carried for 3 years. "You should be," she said softly. Grant stood, his mind a storm of rage and resolve. "I'm meeting Lake tomorrow," he said. "I'll confront him about the fire. If he's hiding something, I'll find it." Sable rose, her expression a mix of hope and dread. "Be careful," she said. "Lake doesn't play fair." She handed him a single page from the box, a grainy photo of Lake meeting a known fixer in an alley. "Start with this," she said, "but don't tell him about me or Noel." Grant took the photo, their fingers brushing briefly, a spark of connection in the dim light. He nodded, pocketing the evidence. "I won't," he promised. As he left, the weight of her trust settled on him, heavy but grounding. Sable watched him go, then locked the door, her heart racing. She knelt by Noel's crib, brushing a curl from his forehead. "We're getting closer," she whispered, her voice fierce with determination. The shadows of James and Catherine's deaths loomed large, but Sable was no longer just a guardian. She was a warrior, and Lake's empire was about to tremble. The flickering fluorescent light in Sable Knight's apartment cast long shadows across the cramped room, turning the peeling wallpaper into a map of her struggles. At 23, Sable sat at her small table, surrounded by a fortress of papers, bank statements, encrypted emails, and grainy photos of Victor Lake's illicit deals. Noel slept in his crib, his soft breaths a reminder of the promise she'd made to James Whitmore 3 years ago, to protect his son at all costs. The revelation to Grant Whitmore about the murder of James and Catherine had been a gamble, but his offer to help had lit a spark of hope. Tonight she wasn't alone. Her allies, forged in the crucible of her quiet determination, had gathered to plan a war against a man who thought himself untouchable. Dr. Aisha Coleman, a law professor with a razor-sharp mind, leaned over a legal pad, her glasses glinting as she scribbled notes. Marcus Tate, an investigative journalist whose exposés had toppled corrupt officials, typed furiously on his laptop, his dark eyes scanning a leaked document. Helen Knight, Sable's aunt and a retired paralegal with a steel spine, sorted through a stack of James's notes, her weathered hands steady. The air crackled with purpose, each person a piece of the machine Sable had built over 3 years of night classes, whispered alliances, and relentless research. She'd transformed from a housemaid into a strategist, her love for Noel the fuel for her fight. Sable stood, her voice low but commanding. "We have a chance now," she said, her dark eyes sweeping the room. "Grant Whitmore's on our side, at least for now. He's got access to Lake's inner circle. We need to use it." Aisha looked up, her brow furrowed. "Can we trust him?" she asked. "He's a billionaire, part of the same world as Lake." Sable hesitated, recalling Grant's intensity, the flicker of guilt in his eyes when she spoke of James. "He's not Lake," she said. "He wants justice for James, and he's our best shot at getting inside." Marcus leaned back, his chair creaking. "Lake's a snake," he said. "I've been tracking his deals for months. Money laundering through shell companies, bribing inspectors to ignore labor violations. But we need hard proof to nail him." He tapped a USB drive on the table, its contents a trove of hacked emails from Lake Enterprises. "This is close, but we need something undeniable. A smoking gun." Helen nodded, holding up a photo of Lake shaking hands with a known fixer. "James got this before he died," she said. "He was so close to exposing Lake. We can't let that go to waste." The door buzzer sounded, sharp and jarring. Sable's heart skipped, her hand instinctively reaching for Noel's crib. "It's Grant," she said, checking the peephole before opening the door. Grant stepped inside, his tailored coat out of place in the dingy apartment, his blue eyes scanning the group with a mix of curiosity and caution. The photo Sable had given him, of Lake with the fixer, was tucked in his pocket, its implications burning through his thoughts. His meeting with Lake that morning had been chilling. Lake's smirk, his casual dismissal of the fire as bad luck, had confirmed Sable's claims. Grant was in, whether he was ready or not. "Who are they?" Grant asked, nodding at the group. Sable introduced them, her voice steady. "Dr. Aisha Coleman, my law professor. Marcus Tate, journalist. Helen Knight, my aunt, and a paralegal. They're my family, and Noel's." Grant's gaze lingered on the papers, the USB drive, the weight of their mission palpable. "You've been planning this for years," he said, a note of respect in his voice. Sable nodded. "Since the night James and Catherine died, Lake took everything from them. I won't let him take Noel." Isha pushed her glasses up, her voice crisp. "We're building a case, legal and public. Lake's crimes go beyond the fire. We've got evidence of tax evasion, worker exploitation, and bribes. But we need more to tie him directly to the murders." She handed Grant a folder, its contents a timeline of Lake's dealings. "You're our eyes inside Whitmore Culinary Group. Can you get us internal records?" Grant hesitated, the weight of betraying his own company settling on him. But James's face, his laughter, his dreams, flashed in his mind. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't a game, Whitmore," he said. "Lake's dangerous. He's got people everywhere, cops, lawyers, maybe even in your boardroom. You slip up, we're all exposed." Grant met his gaze, unflinching. "I've dealt with men like Lake before. He's not invincible." Helen chuckled, her voice dry. "Confidence is good, but don't underestimate him. He killed my nephew's son and his fiancée. He won't hesitate to come for you. Or Sable." Sable's hand rested on the table, near a photo of Noel smiling. "I've been preparing for 3 years," she said, her voice a quiet fire. "Every law book I read, every contact I made, every night I stayed up. It's all for this. Lake thinks I'm nothing, a maid he can ignore. That's his mistake." Her words carried a weight that silenced the room, her determination a force that even Grant, with his billions, couldn't match. He saw her not as the struggling woman from the cemetery, but as a leader, her love for Noel a blade honed to cut through corruption. Grant opened the folder Aisha gave him, scanning the timeline. "I can get you financial records," he said. "Lake's office is locked down, but I have access to the server. If he's hiding something, it'll be there." Sable's eyes met his, a flicker of gratitude breaking through her guard. "Thank you," she said softly. "But don't tell anyone about us. Not yet. Lake can't know we're coming." Aisha outlined the next steps. A legal petition to protect Noel from any custody claims, using precedents of socioeconomic discrimination. Marcus planned to draft an article for the City Herald, holding it until they had undeniable proof. Helen, ever practical, suggested a safe house if things escalated. "Lake's not above sending thugs," she warned. Sable nodded, her mind racing. She'd faced fear before, losing her parents, scraping by, raising Noel alone. But this was different. This was war. Grant stood, his presence filling the room. "I'll start tomorrow," he said. "But Sable, if Lake's as dangerous as you say, you and Noel need protection." Sable's lips curved into a faint smile. "I've kept him safe this long," she said, "but I'll take your help, if you're all in." Grant nodded, a pact sealed in the dim light. "I'm in," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. As the group dispersed, Sable walked Grant to the door. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice low. "You could walk away. Stay safe." Grant paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Because James deserved better," he said, "and because I see how you fight for Noel. I want to fight with you." Sable's heart stirred, but she pushed the feeling down. Trust was a risk she couldn't afford. Not yet. Alone again, Sable knelt by Noel's crib, her fingers brushing his blonde curls. "We're not alone anymore," she whispered, her voice fierce with hope. The box of evidence sat on the table, a silent promise of justice. Lake's empire loomed large, but Sable's allies, her family, were a force he'd never see coming. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready. The city woke to a storm not of rain but of words, as the City Herald's front page screamed a headline that shook the towers of power. Lake Enterprises, Corruption's Culinary Empire. The article, penned by Marcus Tate, was a surgical strike exposing decades of Victor Lake's crimes, money laundering, labor exploitation, and the chilling truth behind the warehouse fire that killed James Whitmore and Catherine Harlow. Sable Knight sat in her cramped apartment, the morning light filtering through a cracked window, her heart pounding as she read the words she'd waited 3 years to see. Noel played on the floor, Oblivious to the seismic shift his mother had set in motion, the USB drive, the leaked emails, the photos, she'd handed them to Marcus, and now the world knew. But with truth came danger, and Sable's dark eyes scanned the room, alert for the backlash she knew would come. Across town, Grant Whitmore stood in his penthouse office. The Herald's front page spread across his mahogany desk. The article cited documents he'd smuggled from Whitmore Culinary Group's servers, financial records tying Lake to shell companies and bribes. Grant's pulse raced, a mix of triumph and dread. He'd crossed a line, betraying a man he'd once trusted, but James's memory demanded it. The photos Sable had given him, of Lake with a fixer, had unlocked a trail of evidence, and Marcus's article was the first blow. Protests were already forming outside the company's headquarters, chants of "Justice for James" echoing through the streets. Grant's phone buzzed incessantly. Board members, lawyers, reporters. But he ignored them, his mind on Sable and Noel. Had he done enough to protect them? In a sleek office on the 45th floor of Whitmore Culinary Group, Victor Lake's face was a mask of cold fury as he read the article. His gray eyes, sharp as a predator's, scanned the damning words. Leaked documents reveal Lake Enterprises orchestrated the 2020 warehouse fire to silence whistleblowers James Whitmore and Catherine Harlow. The article quoted an audio clip, Lake's voice chillingly clear. The fire was clean, no loose ends. Sable had recorded it from James's files, a secret she'd guarded until the perfect moment. Lake crumpled the paper, his knuckles white. "Whitmore," he hissed, sensing Grant's hand in this. But the mention of a source close to the investigation pointed to another player, someone invisible, relentless. Lake dialed a number, his voice low. "Find out who's feeding Tate, and make sure they don't talk again." Sable's apartment was a fortress of quiet resolve as she met with her allies. Dr. Aisha Coleman pored over legal documents, preparing a petition to shield Noel from any custody challenges. Helen Knight, Sable's aunt, organized their evidence, her hands steady despite the threats they now faced. Marcus, fresh from the newsroom, looked exhausted but exhilarated. "The article's gone viral," he said, his laptop open to social media posts demanding Lake's arrest. "The FBI's sniffing around, and the mayor's office is panicking. They took Lake's bribes." Sable nodded, her fingers tracing a photo of James and Catherine. "We've got his attention," she said. "Now we brace for the counterattack." The counterattack came swiftly. Sable found a note slipped under her door, typed in stark black letters, "Back off or the kid pays." Her blood ran cold, but she tucked the note into her box of evidence, her resolve hardening. She called Grant, her voice steady. "Lake's scared," she said. "He's threatening Noel." Grant's response was immediate, his voice a growl. "Move to a safe house. I'll cover it." Sable hesitated. She hated relying on anyone. But Noel's safety came first. "Fine," she said, "but we're not hiding. We're fighting." Grant met them at a discreet townhouse on the city's edge, its windows shuttered against prying eyes. Sable carried Noel, her bag stuffed with essentials and the precious box of evidence. Aisha and Marcus joined them, their faces grim. "Lake's people are circling," Marcus said, showing a photo of a suspicious car near Sable's building. Grant's jaw tightened. "I confronted Lake this morning," he admitted. He denied everything, but his eyes, pure venom. "He knows I'm involved." Sable's gaze locked onto his. "Then you're in as deep as we are," she said. "No turning back." Aisha outlined their strategy. The petition would block any legal moves by Lake, citing his criminal ties as a threat to Noel's safety. Marcus planned a follow-up article, using new evidence Grant had pulled. A ledger of Lake's payments to the fire marshal who buried the arson report. But the key was the audio. "We need to get it to the FBI," Sable said, her voice fierce. "It's our best shot at putting Lake away." Helen nodded, her voice dry. "And we need to keep you alive long enough to do it. Lake's not above hiring muscle." Grant's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant, Clara. "FBI at headquarters. Asking for you." His heart sank. The article had moved faster than expected, and Lake's influence might still sway the investigation. "I'll handle the FBI," he said, standing. "But Sable, you and Noel stay here. No risks." Sable's eyes flashed. "I've been taking risks for 3 years," she said. "I'm not stopping now." Grant saw the fire in her, the same fire that had torn his cheek in half, and nodded. "Then we do this together," he said, a pact forged in the dim light. That evening, Sable sat with Noel, reading him a story as he drifted to sleep. The safe house was quiet, but her mind roared with the weight of their fight. The article had cracked Lake's armor, but he was a wounded beast, dangerous, desperate. She opened her box, pulling out the audio drive, its contents a lifeline and a death sentence. James's voice, recorded in secret, had captured Lake's confession, and Sable had guarded it like a sacred relic. She thought of Catherine, her best friend, whose laughter had filled their late-night talks. "We're almost there," Sable whispered, her voice a vow. Grant, meanwhile, met an FBI agent in a shadowed diner, slipping them a copy of the ledger. "Check Lake's accounts," he said, his voice low. "The article's just the start." The agent nodded, but Grant felt the weight of Lake's reach. Cops on his payroll, judges in his pocket. He drove back to the safe house, his mind on Sable's words. Lake's scared. Fear made men like Lake reckless, and Grant knew the next move could be deadly. Sable stood at the townhouse window, watching the street. A car slowed, its headlights lingering, and her pulse quickened. She clutched the drive, her resolve a shield. The article had lit the fuse, and the explosion was coming. For James, for Catherine, for Noel, she'd see it through. Grant's car pulled up, and their eyes met through the glass, a silent promise binding them. Lake's empire was crumbling, but the war was far from over, and Sable was ready to fight. The boardroom of Whitmore Culinary Group was a cathedral of power, its long mahogany table gleaming under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city's skyline, a glittering reminder of the empire at stake. Grant Whitmore stood at one end, his golden hair catching the light, his blue eyes steely with resolve. At 33, he'd built a legacy, but today he was here to dismantle a lie. Beside him stood Sable Knight, 23, her thrift store dress a defiant contrast to the tailored suits around her. Her dark eyes burned with a fire forged by 3 years of grief and grit, her hand clutching a USB drive that held Victor Lake's confession. Noel was safe with Helen in the safe house, but his future hung on this moment. The air crackled with anticipation, the board members' murmurs falling silent as Lake entered, his gray eyes glinting like a predator's. Victor Lake, the mastermind of Lake Enterprises, took his seat at the head of the table, his smirk a blade honed by years of unchecked power. The City Herald's article, exposing his money laundering and the warehouse fire that killed James Whitmore and Catherine Harlow, had shaken his empire, but he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. "This is a private meeting, Whitmore," Lake snapped, his gaze flicking to Sable with disdain. "Why's the maid here?" Sable's chin lifted, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. "Not anymore," she said, her tone steady despite the weight of every eye on her. "This meeting's about you, Mr. Lake, and the truth." Whispers rippled through the board, their faces a mix of confusion and unease. Grant stepped forward, his presence commanding. "We're here to discuss Lake Enterprises," he said, his voice low but resonant, "and evidence that ties Victor Lake to crimes, including murder." Lake's smirk faltered, but he leaned back, feigning calm. "Slander," he said, his voice smooth. "The Herald's article is a fabrication, and you know it, Grant. You're embarrassing yourself, and this company." His allies on the board nodded, their loyalty bought with years of favors. But Sable saw the flicker of fear in Lake's eyes, a crack in his armor. She'd waited 3 years for this moment, and she wouldn't let it slip. Grant nodded to Sable, a silent signal. She plugged the USB drive into the boardroom's projector, her hands steady despite the pulse hammering in her throat. The screen flickered to life, and a grainy audio clip began to play. Lake's voice, cold and deliberate, filled the room. The fire was clean, no loose ends. Whitmore and his girl were getting too close. Gasps erupted, the board members shifting in their seats, their faces paling. Sable watched Lake's expression freeze, his fingers tightening on the armrests. "That's a fake," he barked, but his voice betrayed a tremor. It's real, Sable said, her voice rising with conviction. James Whitmore and Catherine Harlow recorded you, Lake. They were investigating your money laundering, your bribes, and your exploitation of workers. You killed them to keep your secrets. She clicked to a slide displaying a leaked ledger Grant had pulled from the company servers. Payments to a fire marshal, coded transfers to a fixer. This ties you to the 2020 warehouse fire, she said. You murdered my friends and left their son an orphan. The room erupted in chaos, board members shouting over each other. Lake slammed his fist on the table, his face twisting with rage. You're nothing, girl, he snarled at Sable. A nobody with a grudge. You think you can take me down with this? He lunged for the USB drive, but Grant stepped between them, his frame a wall of resolve. Sit down, Victor, Grant said, his voice a low growl. You're done. Dr. Aisha Coleman, Sable's law professor ally, stood from the back of the room, where she'd slipped in unnoticed. She held a stack of documents, her glasses glinting as she addressed the board. These are legal filings, she said, her voice crisp. Evidence of Lake Enterprises tax evasion, labor violations, and conspiracy to commit murder. The FBI has copies and they're on their way. The board fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Marcus Tate, the journalist, stood beside her, his phone live-streaming the meeting to thousands online. The world's watching, Lake, Marcus said, his voice steady. No more hiding. Lake's allies wavered, their loyalty crumbling under the glare of public scrutiny. A board member, a gray-haired woman named Evelyn, spoke up, her voice trembling. Is this true, Victor? Did you kill James? Lake's eyes darted, searching for an escape, but the room was a trap of his own making. You're all fools, he spat, rising. Whitmore's playing you, using this maid to smear me. I built this company. Sable stepped forward, her presence commanding, despite her simple dress. You built it on lies, she said, her voice ringing with the pain of 3 years. James and Catherine trusted me with their son, Noel. I fought every day to keep him safe from you. This, she gestured to the screen, the evidence blazing. Is there justice? Her words silenced the room, her love for Noel a force that outshone Lake's greed. Grant turned to the board, his voice firm. I move to remove Victor Lake as CEO of Lake Enterprises and suspend all operations pending a federal investigation. Evelyn nodded, her face grim. Seconded, she said. The vote was swift, Lake's allies abandoning him as the evidence mounted. Lake's face contorted, his hand reaching for his phone, but Marcus's live stream pinned him in place. Every move broadcast to the world. The boardroom doors burst open and FBI agents stormed in, their badges flashing. Victor Lake, you're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and murder, the lead agent said, cuffs clicking around Lake's wrists. Lake struggled, his voice a venomous hiss. You'll pay for this, Whitmore. And you, he glared at Sable. You're dead. Sable met his gaze, unflinching. Try me, she said, her voice a quiet blade. As Lake was led away, the boardroom fell silent, the weight of the moment settling like dust. Grant turned to Sable, his eyes filled with respect. You did it, he said, his voice soft. Sable shook her head, her gaze drifting to the screen, where James's name lingered in a document. They did it, she said, her voice thick with emotion. James and Catherine. I just kept their promise. Aisha gathered her papers, her smile proud. The legal case is solid, she said. Lake won't see daylight for decades. Marcus shut off his live stream, his face weary but triumphant. The Herald's running a follow-up tonight, he said. Lake's finished. Sable nodded, her heart heavy with victory and loss. Lake was gone, but the scars of James and Catherine's deaths remained, a wound that justice could only soothe, not heal. Grant touched Sable's arm, his voice low. Noel's safe now, he said. You made that happen. Sable looked at him, seeing not the billionaire, but the man who'd stood by her, risking his empire for truth. We made it happen, she said, a flicker of trust breaking through her guard. The boardroom emptied, the board members dispersing in a daze, but Sable felt a spark of hope. Lake's fall was a start, but Noel's future, her promise to James, was what mattered most. The city exhaled, its frenetic pulse softening as the dust of Victor Lake's downfall settled. Whitmore Culinary Group's headquarters, once a fortress of ambition, buzzed with a quieter energy. Reform, renewal, redemption. Sable Knight stood in a modest office on the 30th floor, her new domain as HR manager, a role Grant Whitmore had offered not out of pity but respect. At 23, she traded her thrift store dresses for a simple blazer, her dark eyes scanning employee files with the same intensity she'd once reserved for evidence against Lake. Noel, now too, played in a corner with a toy truck, his blonde curls bouncing, his laughter a melody that anchored her. The victory in the boardroom had shattered Lake's empire, but it was this moment, building a future for her son, that felt like triumph. Lake's arrest had unleashed a cascade of consequences. The FBI, armed with the ledger Grant provided and the audio Sable guarded, charged him with murder, money laundering, and conspiracy. His assets were frozen, his allies scattering like roaches in the light. The courts, spurred by Dr. Aisha Coleman's legal filings, restored James Whitmore's estate to Noel, a trust fund managed by Grant to ensure the boy's future. Private schools, college, a life unburdened by the poverty Sable had known. She'd moved from her crumbling apartment to a cozy townhouse, its walls painted in soft blues, a framed photo of James and Catherine Harlow on the mantel. Each night she told Noel stories of his parents, their love a legacy stronger than any fortune. Grant Whitmore, no longer just the billionaire who'd stormed into her life, had become a constant presence. He'd shed the armor of his wealth, showing up at Sable's townhouse with groceries, reading bedtime stories to Noel, teaching him to whisk eggs with a chef's precision. His blue eyes, once sharp with suspicion, now softened when he looked at Sable, a warmth that stirred something she wasn't ready to name. The boardroom showdown had changed him. James's death, Lake's betrayal. Sable's courage had cracked open a heart he'd long buried under ambition. Yet the weight of his role in Lake's rise lingered, a guilt he carried in quiet moments. Tonight, the townhouse glowed with lamplight as Sable prepared dinner, the scent of roasted vegetables filling the air. Grant arrived, his tie loosened, a bottle of sparkling cider in hand. "For the chef," he said, his smile boyish. Noel toddled over, hugging Grant's legs, and Sable's heart clenched at the sight. "He's getting fast," Grant said, scooping Noel up, the boy giggling as Grant spun him. Sable watched, her spatula paused, a flicker of a life she'd never dared dream of taking shape. But trust was a fragile thing, and Lake's threats, "You're dead," still echoed, a shadow she couldn't fully shake. Over dinner, Grant broached the future. "The company's restructuring," he said, his voice steady. "New policies, fair wages, worker protections. I want you to lead the initiative, Sable. You know what it's like to be invisible." Sable's fork paused, her eyes meeting his. "You're serious," she said, not a question, but a realization. Grant nodded. "You fought for Noel, for James. You can fight for them, the workers Lake exploited." The offer was more than a job. It was a purpose, a chance to rewrite the rules of a world that had once dismissed her as a maid. Sable leaned back, her mind racing. 3 years ago, she'd been scrubbing floors, studying law books by lamplight, driven by a promise to protect Noel. Now she was a leader, her voice heard in boardrooms. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm, "but not for you, for them." Grant's smile was genuine, no trace of the billionaire's polish. "I wouldn't expect anything less," he said. Noel clapped, mimicking their seriousness, and laughter broke the tension, a fleeting moment of family. Later, as Noel slept, Sable and Grant sat on the porch, the night air cool against their skin. The city's hum was distant, stars piercing the urban haze. Grant's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I came to that cemetery looking for closure," he said. "I found you and Noel instead. You've changed everything, Sable." His words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Sable's heart stirred, but the scars of loss, James, Catherine, her own battles, held her back. "You changed things too," she said, her voice quiet. "You stood with us when you could have walked away." Grant turned to her, his eyes searching. "I don't want to walk away," he said, his hand brushing hers, a spark in the darkness. "Not from Noel, Not from you. Sable's breath caught, the warmth of his touch a contrast to the cool night. She wanted to lean into it, to believe in a future beyond survival, but fear whispered caution. We're a package deal, she said, half teasing, half warning. Grant's smile was unwavering. Good, he said. I'm all in. Their hands lingered, a silent promise forming. Sable thought of the box of evidence, now locked in a safe, its secrets no longer a burden, but a testament to her strength. She'd fought for justice, not revenge, and won. Yet the victory was bittersweet. James and Catherine were gone, their absence a wound that time would only soften. Grant seemed to sense it, his voice gentle. They'd be proud of you, he said. Noel's got the best mother he could ask for. Sable's eyes glistened, but she smiled. And a pretty good friend in you, she said, the closest she could come to admitting the growing bond. Inside, the townhouse was a haven, its walls holding the echoes of Noel's laughter, the ghosts of James and Catherine's love. Sable glanced at the mantel where their photo stood, a reminder of why she'd fought. Grant followed her gaze, his expression solemn. We'll keep their memory alive, he said. For Noel. Sable nodded, her heart full. For all of us, she said. As Grant left, promising to return for breakfast, Sable stood at the door, watching his car disappear. The night was quiet, but her soul hummed with possibility. She'd built a life from ashes, not just for Noel, but for herself. The HR role was a start, a chance to give voice to those Lake had silenced. Grant's presence, steady and unyielding, was another. A partnership she hadn't expected but couldn't deny. She locked the door, her fingers brushing the photo on the mantel. We're okay, she whispered to James and Catherine, her voice steady. We're more than okay. Sable checked on Noel, his tiny chest rising and falling, his toy truck clutched in his hand. She kissed his forehead, her love a shield stronger than any empire. The fight with Lake had been won, but this, her son, her home, her purpose, was the true victory. She sat by his crib, a law book open on her lap, her mind already turning to the workers she'd champion. The world had tried to break her, but Sable Knight was unbreakable, and her new beginning was just the start of a story she'd write with courage and love. The Connecticut dusk painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, casting a soft glow over the cozy townhouse where Sable Knight now called home. 2 years had passed since the boardroom showdown that toppled Victor Lake, and the scars of that battle had begun to heal, replaced by a life Sable had never dared imagine. At 25, she stood on the porch, her dark eyes tracing the silhouette of Noel, now 3, as he chased fireflies across the lawn, his blonde curls bouncing with each gleeful leap. The townhouse, with its white picket fence and blooming garden, was a far cry from the crumbling apartment where she'd once fought to keep him fed. Her new role as HR manager at Whitmore Culinary Group had given her purpose. But it was Noel's laughter and Grant Whitmore's steady presence that gave her peace. The fight against Lake had reshaped the world. His conviction for murder, money laundering, and conspiracy had sent shockwaves through the city, dismantling his empire and exposing the rot within Whitmore Culinary Group. The courts, guided by Dr. Aisha Coleman's legal brilliance, had restored James Whitmore's estate to Noel, ensuring his future with a trust fund for education and security. Sable had used her share of the settlement to buy this home, its walls adorned with photos of James and Catherine Harlow, their smiles a quiet reminder of the promise she'd kept. She'd earned an MBA through night classes, her diploma framed beside their photo, a testament to her relentless drive. Grant Whitmore, once the billionaire who'd stormed into her life with a check and suspicion, had become her partner, not just in work, but in life. At 35, his golden hair was flecked with silver, his blue eyes softened by the years spent rebuilding his company and their bond. He'd led reforms at Whitmore Culinary Group, implementing fair wages and worker protections under Sable's guidance, turning the company into a beacon of change. But it was his evenings with Noel, teaching him to knead dough, reading him stories of far-off lands, that had woven him into Sable's heart. He was no longer the man who'd offered to buy her son. He was family, a truth that both thrilled and terrified her. Tonight the air was warm, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden. Grant joined Sable on the porch, his arm brushing hers as he leaned against the railing. Noel's giggles echoed, his tiny hands grasping at fireflies that danced just out of reach. He's relentless, Grant said, his voice warm with affection. Just like his mom. Sable smiled, her heart stirring at the ease of his words. She'd spent years guarding herself, her trust battered by loss and betrayal, but Grant's constancy had worn down her walls. He'd stood by her through Lake's threats, the FBI's questions, the long nights of doubt, never asking for more than she could give. Inside the townhouse was a haven of memories. A violin rested on a stand, Noel's latest passion, his lessons a nod to James's love of music. Sable had framed a letter from Catherine, found in the box of evidence, its words a lifeline. Sable, if anything happens, raise Noel with love. You're his family now. She'd honored that vow, but Grant had added a new verse to their story. He'd rented a piano for the living room, teaching Noel simple chords, his patience a mirror of the love Sable gave. She caught Grant watching her now, his eyes tracing her face with a tenderness that made her breath catch. You've built something incredible, Grant said, his voice low, breaking the quiet. This home, Noel's future, the changes at the company, it's all you. Sable shook her head, her fingers brushing the railing. It's us, she said. You didn't have to stay, Grant. You could have walked away after Lake. His hand covered hers, warm and steady. I stayed because I found something worth more than an empire, he said. You and Noel. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Sable's heart raced, the weight of her past, James and Catherine's deaths, the years of scraping by, clashing with the hope in Grant's eyes. She'd fought for justice, not just for Noel, but for herself, proving she was more than the maid Lake had dismissed. Now standing here, she felt the possibility of a new chapter, one where love wasn't just a shield, but a bridge. We're a package deal, she said, her voice teasing but soft, echoing their first tentative steps. Grant's smile was radiant, his hand tightening on hers. I wouldn't have it any other way, he said. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking, the air charged with unspoken promises. Sable, I've spent 2 years watching you fight, love, and build. I want to be part of that, forever. He didn't kneel, didn't offer a ring, but his question was clear, his eyes searching hers. Will you let me love you and Noel, always? Sable's breath caught, tears pricking her eyes. She'd faced down a murderer, rebuilt a life from ashes, but this, opening her heart, felt like the greatest risk. Yet Grant's steadiness, his choice to stand beside her, not above her, was a truth she couldn't deny. Yes, she whispered, pulling him closer. Their lips met, a kiss that tasted of starlight and second chances, sealing a vow deeper than words. Noel's laughter rang out, a perfect note in their symphony, and Sable felt James and Catherine's presence, their blessing in the breeze. Helen Knight, visiting that week, watched from the doorway, her eyes crinkling with pride. You did good, girl, she said later, as Sable tucked Noel into bed. Your parents, James, Catherine, they're smiling. Sable nodded, her throat tight. Aunt Helen taught me to fight for what matters, she said, kissing Noel's forehead. And this, him's everything. As Grant joined them, carrying a tray of hot cocoa, Sable framed the moment in her mind. Noel's sleepy smile, Grant's quiet strength, the home they'd built. The fight with Lake had been about justice, but this was about love, a family forged not by blood, but by choice. She thought of Catherine's letter, of James's trust, and knew she'd honored their legacy. Noel would grow up knowing his parents' courage, Sable's resilience, and Grant's devotion, a story written in love, not vengeance. Grant sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. What's next, Sable Knight? He asked, his voice a warm promise. She smiled, leaning into him. We keep building, she said. For Noel, for us, for everyone Lake tried to break. The stars above shone bright, and Sable knew this was her promise, not just to James, but to herself. A life where love was the greatest victory and family the truest empire. Thank you for joining Sable, Grant, and Noel on their journey of courage, love, and justice. What did you think of Sable's fight to honor her promise and build a family against all odds? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know where you're watching from. Your stories inspire us. Has someone ever underestimated you, only to discover your strength? We'd love to hear about it. Subscribe to our channel for more tales of triumph and heart, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep fighting for what matters most.